The prisoner seemed to have discovered something. He looked closely and saw 3 ants carrying a set of clothes. When they touched a switch, the suit suddenly expanded and turned into an old motorcycle outfit. The ants lined up neatly on the ground in a countdown formation. Seeing the prison guard coming, he thought carefully and decided to wear the original suit. He then shrank instantly and slipped past the guard unnoticed. He slid through the door gap and got outside. When Dr. Scott was preparing some kind of transportation for him, a group of ants suddenly appeared and surrounded him. Following the doctor's instructions, he rode on flying ants. As the police officers ran out of the station in panic, Scott had already flown into the sky in his special craft. But because he had never flown before, he felt dizzy on the way, and finally he closed his eyes and fell straight down. When he woke up again, he found himself in a villa. The short-haired, beautiful woman in front of him was Hope, Dr. Pym's daughter. Seeing Scott awake, she walked out without saying a word. When Scott tried to follow her, he found the ground covered with ants. He moved carefully, and the ants seemed intelligent, giving him a clear path. Then the doctor took him to an underground lab. 5 years ago, the doctor had discovered a magical formula. Within certain limits, it could combine molecules and control the size of objects. Although this was a great discovery, the doctor soon realized it was extremely dangerous. He wanted to destroy the formula, but his apprentice Darren had already copied it. Darren secretly built a high-tech combat suit and planned to sell it to Hydra. If the deal went through, Hydra would get an unbeatable high-tech army which could destroy the world. So the doctor worked hard to find Scott and asked him to infiltrate the company and steal the combat suit. He also promised that if the mission succeeded, Scott would legally get visitation rights to his daughter. Scott agreed immediately, but becoming Ant-Man was not easy. He needed strong mental focus and the ability to control his body size at the right time. Next, he was put in a corridor, and the doctor's first task was to pass through a key slot in the door while accelerating. Even though Scott looked stylish closing his helmet, he kept hitting the door. No matter how hard he tried, he kept crashing into it. The doctor had to let Hope first train him in resistance to impacts. Scott thought Hope would be an easy opponent, but in the next moment, she knocked him out with a single punch. Clearly, the path to becoming Ant-Man was not simple. The doctor then took him to the ant tank in the backyard. Scott shrank instantly and entered the ant nest. The first thing he saw was a group of frenzy ants, very fast and able to surround prey in an instant. He was scared and quickly backed away. As Scott went deeper, he encountered the giant bullet ants. He also had to deal with the carpenter ants he had ridden before. Scott's third goal was to learn to control these ants. Only by leading them could he complete his mission efficiently. Since the suit had no weapons, the doctor prepared 2 darts for him. The red dart could shrink objects, while the blue dart could instantly enlarge the target. With everything ready, Scott's first mission began. He had to infiltrate SHIELD and steal a signal blocker. He thought his small size would make it easy, but when he reached the target area, he saw a falcon patrolling. The doctor wanted him to retreat, but Scott went straight in. As expected, he was immediately spotted, and a fight broke out. Although Falcon had lots of combat experience, he couldn't handle Ant-Man, who could freely shrink and grow. Ant-Man threw him over his shoulder, sending Falcon flying. Then he rode on the carpenter ants and entered the base. Doctor and Hope were extremely nervous, but Falcon suddenly broke through the main gate and flew out. Actually, Ant-Man had entered Falcon's body, and without hesitation, pulled out his central processor. Falcon's armor crashed uncontrollably to the ground, completely destroyed, and could no longer detect Ant-Man. Back at the base, the doctor scolded him for ignoring the bigger picture. The soldiers under Mudd's command could not go into battle, but when Scott pulled out the signal blocker from his pocket, he wanted to make sure the plan worked perfectly, so he called Luis and 2 others. They divided the tasks among themselves. Kurt took care of the security system at Black Mirror Company. By adding extra people, he helped disguise Luis as a security guard and get him inside. Once everything was ready, it was Scott's turn. He led a swarm of ants through the sewer. When Luis reached the storage and reduced the water pressure, Scott rode the chairboat into the sewer pipe. The ants, under Scott's command, worked together and formed a staircase with their bodies. They pulled Scott up, and then he rode on the carpenter ants and successfully entered the company. On the other side, the doctor was monitoring everything. Now everyone was ready. The mission to save the world had officially begun. Nebula had once snapped her fingers and wiped out half of Earth's population. Even superheroes like Spider-Man and Doctor Strange had no power to fight back at that time. They could only sit and wait to turn to ash. Even the survivors lived miserable lives. Then this man appeared and changed everything. He not only found all the Infinity Stones, but also united the remaining Avengers to fight Nebula in the final battle. In the end, they won and brought back all the missing people, but Iron Man died in the battle. This man had played a key role in the final battle, but 5 years ago, he was just a thief that everyone hated. His name was Scott. He had been sentenced to almost 2 years in prison for theft. Today was the day he got out of prison. Fellow inmates came to congratulate him, and his friend Luis had been waiting outside for a long time. They went together to his daughter's birthday party, but because Scott had never paid child support, his ex-wife didn't welcome him at all, and even threw him out without saying a word. Scott had no choice but to work at a local ice cream shop. But with his criminal record, society didn't accept him, and eventually, the boss fired him. To see his daughter, Scott thought carefully and decided to plan something big with Luis. Using their wide network, they learned that a mysterious treasure box was hidden in a villa 5 kilometers away. The owner would attend a charity party there the next evening. Once the target was decided, everyone divided their work. First, they built a special car, then installed a signal blocker to cut off wireless signals within 100 kilometers. When everything was ready, Scott made his move. He easily reached the window of the second floor. With a small knife, he carefully cut and entered the apartment. But when he opened the wooden door, he realized it was protected by a fingerprint lock. While his teammates were ready to give up, Scott quietly went to the kitchen. He searched and found a bottle of glue. Using tape, he lifted the fingerprint from the doorknob, put glue on the tape, and heated it lightly with a flame. Just like that, he got the fingerprint without any difficulty. When Scott passed the verification and opened the door, what he saw was not treasure at all. Instead, there was a strong metal safe made from the same material as the Titanic. Although the safe was theoretically indestructible, Scott knew its only weak point. Without hesitation, he pulled out a small pad from his pocket, made a tiny hole next to the door, and poured some mineral water through a funnel. For the last step, he added liquid nitrogen. The internal gears began to freeze. Scott quickly placed a cushion outside to prevent any noise. In just a few moments, the safe door started to swell. Screws popped out one by one, and with a loud crash, the door fell onto the cushion. When Scott opened the safe, he found only some potions, design blueprints, and a torn, old biker suit on the table. Feeling disappointed, he still decided to take the suit. Little did he know, a camera-carrying ant had recorded all his actions. Curious to understand everything, Scott put on the suit. He noticed 2 red buttons on his arm. Pressing the left one did nothing, but when he pressed the right button, his body began shrinking uncontrollably. He fell into the bathtub below, like an ant, completely stunned by what he saw. At that moment, Luis turned on the tap above. Water gushed out like a flood. Scott ran desperately, but the water lifted him and slammed him onto the floor. The metal pieces on his belt almost crushed him, but luckily, his small frame fit into a crack. He tumbled down, eventually breaking through the floorboards and landing on a DJ machine below. He dodged between huge legs, trying not to get crushed. In a panic, he barely escaped into a sewer, only to be sucked out by a vacuum used by an old lady. Using his turbo boost, he made a jump and hit a taxi below. The suit finally returned to its normal size after being soaked in rain. Back home, he carefully stored the suit back in the safe. Just as Scott was about to leave this dangerous place, a group of police suddenly appeared and surrounded him. He had no choice but to surrender. In the police station, he met a mysterious old man, Dr. Pym. During their conversation, Scott learned that everything, including how he got the information and successfully stole the 5 suits, was part of Dr. Pym's plan. Dr. Pym's purpose was to test whether Scott was truly capable of becoming a hero. Dr. Pym had to leave first. Meanwhile, the ants shown on the surveillance gradually dispersed. Scott was sent to a cell by the guards. Then, a bee suddenly landed above the iron gate, and some ants slowly approached. Scott looked closely and saw the ants carrying a strange suit. In the next moment, he was enlarged to a huge size. The ants arranged themselves in a countdown formation on the ground. Despite the pressure, Scott quickly put on the silver suit, mounted an ant, and got ready to follow Dr. Pym's instructions. Scott successfully completed an unprecedented escape. He was wearing a high-tech wasp suit. This suit could shrink the user infinitely, and by copying it, one could easily create the strongest army. At this moment, Bald Darren was planning to sell it to the evil Hydra. If the deal succeeded, the whole world would fall into endless chaos. To prevent this, Dr. Pym immediately coordinated with the Ant-Man team for a final mission. First, they infiltrated the company and closed all the water valves. Scott led the army of ants into the sewer pipes and used fire to navigate through. Finally, he reached the rendezvous point. He saw a ladder made entirely of ants. He climbed up the ladder carefully and successfully entered the company building. Hop installed Flat E into the server, while Scott entered the machine room through the ventilation system. He controlled the speed ants to reach the central processor. At his signal, the ants generated massive electricity, burning the entire database. To completely crush Darren's plan, Scott moved to the warehouse storing PIM particles. Without hesitation, he kicked a screw the same size as himself. As the screw passed through the laser grid, it exploded into dust. Seeing this, Scott immediately jumped. As he was about to reach the dangerous zone, his teammates pressed a button. Scott survived, but the wasp suit suddenly sank, and the infrared system cut the safety rope. It was all part of Darren's trap. He had anticipated this and prepared accordingly. Darren managed to capture Dr. Pym and lift Ant-Man. Just when he thought he had won, Scott pulled out 2 transforming darts from his pocket. In the next second, he engaged in close combat. The security guards were no match for him, but Darren shot Dr. Pym. When Darren tried to shoot Ant-Man, hundreds of ants blocked the gun barrel. He had no choice but to drop his gun and flee. Scott immediately chased after him. Facing a hail of bullets from the guards, Scott shrank and slipped through the gaps, running across the gun. Within moments, he defeated all of them. When more security reinforcements arrived, he shrank again and escaped into a model in front of him. Bullets rained down like a storm, but Luis arrived just in time and with 3 powerful punches defeated them all. Meanwhile, Dr. Pym was actually not dead. A bullet had hit his shoulder. Hop thought they were safe, but Dr. Pym calmly pulled a keychain from his pocket. As Darren boarded his aircraft to escape, suddenly a swarm of ants charged forward. The attacker was Scott, Ant-Man. He punched through glass and dove in. Darren fired back, but as he was fully engaged, a timed bomb exploded in the distance. The entire building was sucked into the quantum realm. Seeing his efforts unravel, Darren slapped Scott away and immediately put on the whirlwind suit. Unlike Ant-Man, Darren's battlesuit had 2 laser cannons that could freely extend and shrink. Scott could only pull and punch. He hit Darren's helmet with a punch. Darren immediately shrank, and then both started fighting again. They fell straight down inside a suitcase and kept hitting each other during the fall. Finally, they fell into a pond along with the outer shell. Nearby, a girl was shocked, and Darren suddenly expanded and jumped out of the water. They wanted to call the police, but Darren used his laser cannon to stop them. Scott rushed out of the water, but the fight wasn't over yet. Scott saw the right moment and slapped Darren, sending him forward. Suddenly, police appeared and fired electric devices indiscriminately. Scott was taken into the police car. Meanwhile, Darren was not dead. He went to Scott's house and kidnapped his daughter. At the critical moment, Scott arrived, threw his darts, and prepared for a final fight. Both had shrunk and fell onto a toy table. Darren climbed a toy train and started shooting, while Scott kept moving through gaps. Scott had already summoned his ant army. The ants bit Darren's weapons, and Scott lifted wooden planks to strike him. Then the toy train started moving, and the ants surrounded Darren. Even though Darren shot one ant at a time, there were too many. He had no choice but to escape. He targeted Scott with heavy fire, destroying all the toys in the room. Scott used his blue dart to counterattack, but Darren dodged it, and the dart fell on the ants below. Scott tried to strengthen himself, but Darren struck him down onto the Thomas toy. The toy expanded and broke the ceiling, crushing cars outside. Knowing he could not fight Darren normally, Scott took a huge risk. He shrank himself down to molecular size. Darren was about to attack him, but Scott jumped into Darren's body. Without hesitation, he destroyed the electronic components inside. The wasp suit twisted, kept shrinking, and finally turned into light, disappearing completely. Scott also, now tiny, entered the quantum realm. The strange and surreal surroundings felt completely unfamiliar. Just as he was about to give up, he heard his daughter calling from afar. He carefully took out his blue dart, replaced his waste conversion device with full force, and activated the switch on his arm. Scott successfully crossed dimensions and returned to his normal size. At the end of the movie, Dr. Pym gave Hope a flying suit, and Scott lived happily ever after with his beloved.